What could make a queen, surrounded by power, protection, and beauty, feel this afraid? She was not afraid of losing comfort. She was afraid of what the law could do to her, because one message was enough to turn her crown into a risk. This is the moment Esther realized silence might cost her everything. Esther grew up without parents, raised as an orphan in a land that did not belong to her people. She was Jewish, living among people who did not share her faith, her customs, or her history. From a young age, Esther was taught to be careful, especially about who she was and where she came from. She learned that staying quiet could keep her safe, and that attention could sometimes be dangerous. Long before courage was asked of her, Esther learned how to survive by not being noticed. As Esther grew older, the empire around her grew louder, stronger, and far more powerful than she was. This was the palace of King Xerxes, a ruler whose word carried the force of law across the empire. King Xerxes threw a huge banquet to show off his wealth, and the room felt like power on display. That night, the king sent for Queen Vashti to come and be displayed to his guests. Vashti refused. The king felt embarrassed in front of his officials, and they pushed him to remove Vashti, so no queen would ever defy him again. After Vashti was removed, an order went out across the empire. Young women were to be gathered for the king, and Esther was taken into that process. Before any woman could even see the king, she spent months in preparation, learning palace customs and waiting her turn. For Esther, waiting became a way of life. Days passed without knowing if she would be chosen or forgotten. When Esther's turn came, she was summoned, not to choose her future, but to be evaluated by it. The king saw Esther among many others, and she found favor, not because she asked for it, but because he chose her. Esther became queen, but nothing about her life felt secure in this, and she still hid who she was. Outside the palace, Mordecai spent his days at the king's gate, watching events that could shape Esther's future. Mordecai took his role seriously, believing that quiet loyalty mattered, even when no one seemed to notice. Among the officials was Haman, a powerful man who expected respect and demanded it from everyone who saw him. When others bowed, Mordecai did not out of rebellion, but because his faith would not let him kneel to a man. Haman's pride was wounded, and in that moment, his anger fixed itself not only on Mordecai, but on everyone Mordecai belonged to. It didn't take long for others to notice Mordecai's refusal, and soon word reached Haman that Mordecai was Jewish. When Haman learned who Mordecai was, his anger grew. One man's defiance suddenly felt too small for his wounded pride. Haman decided it wasn't enough to punish Mordecai alone. He chose to target every Jew living in the empire. To choose the day of destruction, Haman cast lots, a practice meant to disguise cruelty as fate. The chosen date lay months away, just far enough to make the plan feel distant, and just close enough to be deadly. Haman requested an audience with the king, choosing his words carefully before speaking. He spoke of a group of people scattered across the empire, different in their customs, and he never said their name. Haman warned that these people did not obey the king's laws, turning difference into suspicion. Without asking who they were, the king gave Haman his signet ring, granting him full authority. The decree was written, sealed, and sent out, because Persian law could not be undone, even by the king himself. The decree moved quickly, copied, sealed, and carried across the empire before anyone could stop it. When the decree was read publicly, many didn't understand it. But those who did felt the danger immediately. Mordecai understood exactly what the decree meant. It named a day when his people were meant to be erased. He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned openly, because silence was no longer an option. Inside the palace, Esther heard of Mordecai's mourning and realized the danger she had been hiding from had finally reached her. For the first time, Esther understood that hiding her identity had not protected her. It had only delayed the danger. Approaching the king uninvited was forbidden. Anyone who did so could be killed unless the king chose to show mercy. Even as queen, Esther had no right to enter the king's presence unless he called for her. Mordecai sent word to Esther, urging her to speak to the king and beg for mercy for her people. Esther answered truthfully. She had not been summoned by the king in 30 days, and going to him uninvited could cost her life. Mordecai sent back a clear answer. Esther should not think the palace would spare her just because she wore a crown. Mordecai warned that if she stayed silent, relief might still come, but she and her family would not escape the decree. Then came the question that would not leave her. Who knew whether she had come to royal power for a moment like this? Esther realized that her safety and her calling could no longer exist together. She told Mordecai to gather the people and fast with her, because this decision would be faced together, not alone. Fasting meant more than skipping meals. It was how the people humbled themselves and asked God for mercy when no human solution remained. Though surrounded by luxury, Esther fasted too. laying aside comfort as she prepared to risk her life. For 3 days, Esther waited, prayed, and faced the fear she could not outrun. When the fast ended, Esther dressed not for beauty, but for respect. Knowing appearance could shape whether she lived or died. Knowing the law and the risk, Esther walked toward the throne room. Prepared to face whatever waited on the other side, Esther stepped into the throne room without being summoned, something the law strictly forbade. By Persian law, anyone who entered the king's presence uninvited could be executed on the spot. Only one thing could spare a person's life: the king choosing to extend his scepter. Esther waited, knowing that everything, her life and her people, hung on the king's next movement. When the king extended his scepter, Esther was spared, invited to speak instead of being condemned. With the scepter extended, Esther was allowed to speak, but every word still mattered. She did not mention the decree or accuse anyone. She simply invited the king and Haman to a banquet she had prepared. Esther understood that truth spoken too quickly could be ignored. Timing would make it impossible to dismiss. The king agreed without hesitation, pleased by the invitation and unaware of what was coming. Haman accepted eagerly, believing the queen's favor confirmed his growing power. The first banquet was quiet and careful, designed not to impress but to observe. When the king asked again for her request, Esther delayed once more, inviting them to return the next day. She was allowing the moment to mature, knowing truth lands harder when pride feels secure. Haman left the banquet proud, convinced that being invited meant he stood above every other official. But when Haman saw Mordecai still refusing to bow, his joy turned back into fury. Haman returned home furious. One man's refusal had undone the pride he carried all day. He listed his wealth, his rank, and the honor of being invited to the queen's banquet. Yet none of it eased his anger. As long as Mordecai lived and refused to bow, Haman said, none of his success meant anything. His wife and advisors suggested a public solution: build a gallows and ask the king to have Mordecai executed. Satisfied with the plan, Haman went to rest, certain that by morning Mordecai would be gone. That same night, the king could not sleep, though nothing seemed outwardly wrong. To pass the time, the king ordered the royal records to be read aloud, accounts of loyalty kept for moments just like this. The record described how Mordecai had once uncovered a plot to assassinate the king, and how nothing had been done to reward him. Disturbed, the king asked what honor had been given to Mordecai, and learned that his loyalty had gone unnoticed. As dawn approached, the king decided the oversight had to be corrected, unaware of how close danger still stood. Early that morning, Haman came to the palace to ask for permission to have Mordecai executed. Before Haman could speak, the king asked him a question about honor, not punishment. Assuming the honor was meant for him, Haman described a public celebration fit for a man the king delighted to reward. Then the king ordered Haman to carry out every detail. For Mordecai, the man Haman planned to destroy was publicly honored by Haman himself, before the entire city. Haman returned home humiliated, his honor stripped away in public before the city. His advisors warned him that opposing Mordecai might mean his downfall. But the warning came too late. Before he could process what had happened, Haman was summoned again to the queen's banquet. When the king asked again for her request, Esther spoke clearly. She asked for her life and for the lives of her people. She explained that a decree written in the king's name had been signed to destroy her people. Even though she herself was Jewish, the king was stunned. He had signed a decree without knowing it would destroy his own queen and her people. He demanded to know who would dare plan such destruction within his kingdom. Esther answered plainly. Haman was the man who planned the extermination of her people. The king realized his authority had been used as a weapon, and his anger turned toward the man who had deceived him. Haman understood that the plan he had hidden behind law and pride had finally been laid bare. The king stepped outside to consider what he had heard, knowing his own seal had made the decree law. When the king stepped out, Haman panicked. He threw himself beside Esther's couch, begging her to plead for his life. In Persian court culture, no man was allowed to touch or even approach the queen without permission. In desperation, Haman crossed that boundary. When the king returned and saw Haman over the queen, it appeared that he was assaulting her inside the palace itself. Under Persian law, threatening the queen was treason. Haman's actions confirmed his guilt beyond appeal. One official explained that Haman had already built a gallows, 50 cubits high, intended for Mordecai. The king grasped the full irony. Haman had prepared death for the very man whose loyalty had saved his life. Without hesitation, the king ordered that Haman be executed on the gallows he had built. Haman was executed that day, ending the violence he had set in motion through pride and deceit. Haman's death stopped his hand, But the decree he wrote still threatened Esther's people. Although Haman was dead, the decree he had written still stood, because Persian law could not simply be undone. Once a decree was sealed with the king's signet ring, even the king himself could not revoke it. Esther asked the king to act not by erasing the law, but by creating a way to protect her people. The king authorized a new decree, one that allowed the Jewish people to defend themselves on the appointed day. The power once used to destroy was now placed in hands that would use it to preserve life. A new decree was written, sealed, and sent across the empire, carrying a very different message. The law now permitted the Jewish people to assemble, arm themselves, and defend their lives against any attack. This was not a call for revenge, but for survival. Permission to stand instead of waiting to be destroyed. Mordecai was appointed to high office, replacing Haman and overseeing the enforcement of the new decree. Fear did not disappear, but it was no longer paralyzing. The people were no longer alone. When the appointed day arrived, the city waited, uncertain which law would be acted upon. When attacks came, the people defended themselves, only as the law allowed and only when threatened. Many who had planned violence withdrew, realizing the balance of power had changed and easy targets no longer existed. They did not seize property or seek revenge, because survival, not dominance, had been the goal. By day's end, the threat against the Jewish people had collapsed, not through conquest but through lawful defense. Across the empire, relief spread quietly. Ordinary life resumed, knowing annihilation was no longer hanging overhead. Esther asked that the events be formally recorded, so the people would remember how deliverance came and why vigilance still mattered. They marked the days with meals and generosity, remembering survival, not celebrating victory. The celebration was called Purim, named after the lots Haman cast to choose the day of destruction, now remembered as the day the plan failed. Esther's courage reshaped history, not through force but through timing, clarity, and the choice to stand when silence felt safer. Thank you for staying with us through this story. If this story helped you understand the Bible more deeply or touch something in your heart, you're welcome to like and subscribe. Here on Living Word Aftertales, we tell biblically faithful stories with clarity, history, and heart. You can share this story with someone who may need to be reminded that God still works through ordinary people. You are seen, you are loved, and your story matters to God. Until next time, God bless.